Hey folks, Anthony Desiato here. We will get to our regular episode in just a minute, but first, I'm sitting here with beloved Alternate Realities elder statesman Rich Roney.
Thanks for having me.
And a relatively new addition to the Flat Squirrel podcast roster, Scott Honig.
Thanks for having me back.
So the three of us, in a moment, after we do this little promo, we are going to record a special episode of My Comic Shop Book Club revolving around, I mean, these are big ones. The seminal 1985 storyline, Crisis on Infinite Earths, and its 2005 sequel, Infinite Crisis. And that episode is going to go live on Patreon at the $1 level. $1. What more do you want? At the $1 level, 1 week from today, on Wednesday, July 31st. I'm very, very excited to get into this recording here. And I'm curious, for each of you, if you have a moment, something that really stands out to you with respect to buying at a comic shop, either Crisis or Infinite Crisis. Anything specifically come to mind?
Well, I'll say for myself, prior to Crisis on Infinite Earths, I had not been reading comics for a number of years. I'd say probably about 6 or 7 years. And then somehow I got introduced to this, and I remember towards the end of it, it might have been Martin Luther King Day or around President's Day, I went to Dragon's Den on Central Avenue, and I picked up 2 of the issues for Crisis on Infinite Earths. And I was thrilled because at that time, direct sales stores were really just starting out. So Dragon's Den was just really a goldmine. I was able to get 2 of them there. I was thrilled.
Awesome. And I'm glad you mentioned Dragon's Den, because Dragon's Den will be the subject of one of our upcoming episodes, so people can stay tuned for that. And Scott, what about you?
So it was the summer of 1998, and I was an editorial intern at Marvel Comics. And as part of my internship, I had to read 10 books in or about the field in which I was interning. So I asked staff members at Marvel, what do I read? And Crisis was one of the things that they recommended if I hadn't read it already, and I hadn't. So I went to Jim Hanley's Universe in Manhattan, and I picked up the full trade paperback, which I'm holding right now, of Crisis on Infinite Earths, and I read the whole thing in one shot in about 2 days. And not having really been a DC reader at the time, I understood that it was very important in terms of the comics landscape, but I really didn't understand a lot of the story or who the characters were or what changes were being made until much, much, much later.
Oh, interesting that Marvel recommended you read it, but it makes sense. And then for myself personally, I mean, I wasn't born when the original Crisis came out, but I was very excited for Infinite Crisis, such that I was a freshman in college. I was commuting to Fordham, and I had one class on Wednesdays. It was a Spanish class, and I remember the day that Infinite Crisis #1 came out, I skipped that Spanish class. And I didn't skip many classes in my academic career, but I skipped that Spanish class, and I went to work at Alternate Realities that morning to help break down the shipment so I could get my hands on Infinite Crisis #1 as soon as possible. So it's always interesting to kind of compare notes on that. So we'll continue. We'll get into our recording. People can hear that on the 31st. The other news that I want to share is that, remember that time I made a feature-length documentary about comic book stores across America? Good times. So the movie is actually going to be screening twice this summer, 2 upcoming opportunities to see the film in a theater. The first is coming up very shortly on Sunday, July 28th at 3 o'clock p.m. at the Darris Theater in Boonton, New Jersey. The doc will be screening again at 3 o'clock, followed by a Q&A with yours truly. And you can get tickets for that at brownpapertickets.com, and you can use the discount code FLATSQUIRREL to unlock the discounted ticket price. And then in August, the documentary is going to be screening at ReedPop's newest convention, Keystone Comic Con in Philadelphia. So you can head on over to the ReedPop site and the Keystone Comic Con page for all of the details. Unfortunately, I will not be in attendance for that, as my son is due to be born that very weekend. So unfortunately, I won't be there in person, but I'm going to be recording a special little video intro. So if you're in the area, if you're already planning to go to the convention, if this is added motivation to go, I really hope that you'll check out the screening. My Comic Shop history is brought to you in part by our friends at Fat Moose Comics in Whippany, New Jersey. And here we happen to have Fat Moose clerk Sean Hendricks.
Hi, how you doing?
Fat Moose is New Jersey's oldest comic shop, correct?
Yes. And I think I may be one of North Jersey's oldest comic shop clerks.
But you have the appearance and spirit of a much younger man.
There you go. I get that a lot. So I'm supposed to hype the store now.
Go for it.
Well, I'll tell you this. We recently discounted heavily a whole bunch of trades and hardcovers. They're between 40 to 60% off. 2 huge bins of books and good stuff too. Not just the unsellable stuff. A lot of good Marvel and DC trades. So come and check those out. They're perpetually on sale until we get rid of them. It's not a limited thing. So
what a deal. Well, there you have it. Go check out Fat Moose. They say if you live one place long enough, you are that place. My name is Anthony Desiato, and I've lived in Westchester, New York my entire life. This season, I'll be telling my county's story through her comic shops, capturing a microcosm of the comics industry during the pivotal 1990s. Everything comes full circle this season, with the final piece of my comic shop history. Welcome to My Comic Shop History. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. This episode, our tour through the lost comic shops of Westchester, brings us to a store that we've talked about a lot on the podcast over the years, Alternate Realities, aka My Comic Shop. But we're here to talk about it again because a season about Westchester shops would not be complete if we didn't talk about Alternate Realities. But this time around, we're going to attack it from a slightly different angle. So I'm very excited to welcome to the show, for the first time, former Alternate Realities owner, Prem Itharat.
Hi, how are you doing?
How'd I do on the name?
Perfect.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You're not just saying that?
Nope.
All right, I appreciate that. I'm glad. So welcome to My Comic Shop History.
Thank you for having me.
At long last, we are sitting across from each other, 2 Alternate Realities legends, face to face. I mean, I think this is, it's kind of momentous because, you and I have met just a few times at like Alternate Realities dinners.
It's true.
But, as we've discussed on the podcast before, when we have these large groups, oftentimes you're really limited to talking to the couple of people right around you. So I don't think you and I have ever really exchanged more than hellos and goodbyes.
Yeah, it's been interesting because I've been away from Alternate for quite a bit. So it's always also pretty nostalgic to getting back together with people, especially Steve and the old crew, as I call it.
Yeah, the old guard, those AR veterans. But, like I was saying, in that quick little intro, this episode, it was a little tricky for me because we've talked about AR so much over the years. And, the entire first season of this podcast was devoted to AR and its closing. And so, the question was, it's like, well, what could we do with this that would be a little bit different than what we've done before? Because I felt it did need to be represented in this tour through the Westchester County comic shop scene. And so I thought you were perfect for this because it's a great opportunity for me to get to know you, and we had no overlap. So you
Correct.
represent an entire era of the store that has been discussed here and there, but I don't think we've fully unpacked.
Only from one perspective, maybe, or a few.
Yeah. I mean, because we have had people, who were with the store, in the earlier days. But again, you and I didn't have any of that overlap, whereas I did overlap with those other guys. So
Sure.
This should be interesting.
I think so. We'll see.
So, when I do these episodes, I always do my homework. It's an important part of being the host.
Okay.
And when, like I'm going to a comic shop, for example, pretty much any stores these days, especially the stores I've had on the show, they have some social media presence. I can, see what they've been posting, read reviews on Yelp, things like that to get a little bit of a sense of the store. If I interview a creator, they've done interviews, there's their work that I can look at. Mm-hmm. With you, though, it was a little tough because I didn't have, that body of material necessarily, to look back on. So I turned to the Alternate Realities crew, specifically that old guard. And this maybe will give people a little insight into the Alternate Realities community here. So we have this private Facebook group, which I'll invite you to join. You're more than welcome. But we set this up when the store was closing because we figured, if the inner circle needed to sort of, confer about something, we'd have
Sure.
a space online to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been largely inactive for quite some time now. But in advance of the recording, I said that I am interviewing the one and only Prem on the podcast. What should I ask him? He and I never overlapped at the store, so any anecdotes or insight into his tenure would be much appreciated. So that's what I put out there. Odo, former owner and one of the founders of the store, he was the first to respond. He said, "There's so much, I don't know where to start." And you know what? He never started. That's as much as I got from him.
Wow.
Then we had Michael Kaplan, who we and longtime listeners know best as Metalhead,
Yep.
who said, "Oh, Prem stories. So many Prem stories." ... Brandon got specific here and explicit, so I'm going to clean this up. F you, Mom. Do you know what this is in reference to? This is now a specific anecdote that he's pointing to. So Steve chimed in and he said, he said, Prem didn't say that, did he? I thought he said, "Thanks, Mom. Thanks for nothing." Does this story ring any bells?
It does. It does. So I don't remember cursing at all.
I think that might have been added later on.
Brandon tends to embellish things from time to time. That was in, if I remember correctly, I don't know. I guess I was an owner at the time. I guess Steve was probably still in the fold. It was probably Steve, Brandon, and I. And for some reason, this was back in the eBay days where you didn't really know people. It wasn't very well established. There wasn't guarantees, I don't think, at the time of, if you had a problem with a seller, you could go and say, "Hey, eBay, give me my money back." And so I believe this was when we were trying to get something from Japan. I think it was probably something related to Pokemon, because of course Pokemon was an incredible craze back then, and we needed essentially to wire or send someone, I believe it was $5,000 to $10,000, which at the time I didn't have.
I mean, not a small amount.
Yeah, not a small amount, but not like a huge amount, but a large enough amount that it would be ridiculous for someone, I was probably 18, 19, maybe somewhere around there, to ask their mother or their parent out of the blue to do out of a whim. And so I believe the conversation, it was a phone call to my mom, and I believe it was sort of like the thanks for nothing, and then I hung up obviously in like a rage almost. And looking back at that moment, and I kind of thought about this too before coming here, because I was like, oh, what were some memorable moments? And that was certainly one of them. And it was just kind of an interesting time. I didn't really know, I didn't really have perspective back then, right? And so it was an interesting thing to think about, and it was kind of ridiculous that I would even ask. I knew they had the money, but it wasn't like, a couple $100 or, I guess in my mind, it was for the business. So it felt like a legitimate ask. Mm-hmm. But then again, my parents weren't like business partners. So yeah, so that was the context for that.
Gotcha. All right. Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Drew, one of the former co-owners of the store, he just posted a photo of, I want to say, a ball that said Prem and the source underneath. Does this ring any bells?
That doesn't. I'm curious now.
I'm holding up a photo of it. It might not be anything. It might just be a random photo.
It might need some jarring to jog my memory on that one.
Unfortunately, that was all that Drew contributed. He just put that there and he left.
I can't help you with that.
Yeah.
It might come back to me.
Metal, still part of this conversation. He comes back in. He says, "Just want to say I've been thinking about Prem stories for the last 24 hours. I think we can dedicate a season to it, a podcast season to it." At which point I responded and I said, "Looking forward to some specifics."
And what do you say?
So at this point now, thankfully, we did get a couple of things, a couple of little anecdote teases that they shared with me, which we'll get to in a moment. But one of the things that Metal did say, he said, "Pretty sure Prem doesn't want to talk about any of the things we find so entertaining." To which I said, I'm not looking to ambush the guy with any of this stuff. Like, I'm just looking for a little bit of background, a little bit of context about the time. The sense that I've gotten from that era of the store, and I guess that's one of the things I wanted to ask you. I've always gotten the sense it was a little bit rowdier and more prank filled in those days.
Yeah, I'd say so. We all had a good time. We worked hard, but we all had a good time. But it really did teach me a lot of practical skills, business skills. And it was just a fun time. It was like the Clerks movie way back when. Like, it really was. It was like ridiculous at times. I'd be playing I don't know if you remember if Paul Miller ever came up in conversation, maybe Steve or
Yeah,
he
no,
would,
not specifically.
He would come up and on a random day, and he used to drive people around, sort of like a personal chauffeur, and we would bring out a game of cribbage. We used to play all the time, Steve and I and Paul. And when things were quiet, it was like, oh, well, what do you do to keep busy? And so cribbage was actually one of the few games that I picked up from Paul, and it was just a fun game to just randomly play at the store.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely remember Steve talking about it. I don't know that we necessarily discussed it on the podcast, so that's interesting. And it's funny too when you talk about taught you a lot about business. So it's funny over these past few years since I started doing the documentaries and the podcast. Our mutual friend Rich Roney, beloved elder statesman of the Alternate Realities group, he's been saying to me that he's like, hey, that's how I get into my Rich Roney impression. He's like, hey. You could use Steve as a case study. You could get your MBA, like using the store as an example, from a business perspective.
Right.
And that would be interesting. And in some ways, for all of the business talk that I've done with retailers, part of me feels like I missed my calling and that maybe I should have gone to business school instead of law school. You went to business school. You went to NYU undergrad and grad, right?
I did 2 years at the Arts and Sciences School and then transferred to Stern. NYU School of Business.
Yeah, nothing to sneeze at.
No. And then I went to a part-time MBA program as well, which I wrapped up in 2011. But interesting enough, I believe at the time I co-owned the business while going to college. And so this was, 20 years ago or something like that. And, when the Pokémon craze came, I remember distinctly because I would work on the weekends because I was physically at school. I couldn't be at two places at one time. And so I would come up, I would say every other Thursday or Friday, I would go down to Chinatown. I don't know if you heard these stories before, but
No.
Back in the day when VHSs were still a thing, so there were tapes, I would get a list, probably from Steve, and say, oh, we need episodes, blah, 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 of Dragon Ball Z on VHS. Or it would be like these imports that come from China or Japan or whatnot. So it could be Pokemon cards or this or that, toys, Dragon Ball Z figurines. And I would literally be carrying two big blue bags of almost like trash bags of stuff. And it would make my mom come and pick me up from my dorm room. And this was kind of my life for however many years. So it was an interesting time.
Yeah, so in talking to, even though it's hard to get some specifics out of Steve, in talking to Steve and to Rich about you and your time at the store, there were a couple of things that both of them mentioned that really stood out about you. And, one of them was, the fact that you became an owner at a relatively young age. And this was something that, I spoke with Brandon about as well. Brandon Montclair, I was a comic book creator.
Right.
He was one of the owners for a period of time as well. And he bought into the store at such a young age too. And it was always, like shocking to me because, I was working at the store as a high schooler, as a college age kid. And the thought of like buying in, that's not something I would have attempted. So the fact that you guys did that is really impressive to me. So they spoke about that. And what a keen, business sense that you had and still have. And I really want to get into that a bit and talk about, just your take on the business side of alternate realities. And then they did mention that, you were very quiet initially, which is something that I can identify with a lot because I was a very shy, quiet kid myself. And especially, when I first started working at the store and, for quite some time, we always talk about the dinners, like these big dinners. Mm-hmm. For quite some time, like they would invite me to go and I was like so shy. I never went. It took probably a couple of years of me working there before I finally went. But so was it shyness on your part or just more your just general quiet nature?
Yeah, I think I was definitely introverted at the time. I still think I'm introverted, but I guess I'm out there a lot more. I sort of gotten comfortable with getting uncomfortable. And really now it would be, from someone looking in, it would be very difficult, I think, to tell that I'm introverted because I am out there a lot. I am doing a lot of work, nonprofit wise. I'm doing a lot of social sort of networking events and things like that. But at the store, 100% positive, I was definitely introverted. I didn't say much. And even in the outings, I remember going to Pizza and Brew. That would be kind of our spot. Mm-hmm. And this was before they renovated. I forget how many years ago they renovated, but this was way back when they still had the sort of train inside, and really great memories. I mean, I was definitely quiet. There's no doubt about that. I think I've changed quite a bit. But for customers that kind of knew me, I think it was kind of like night and day, because they would see another side of me that maybe a lot of others didn't see.
So, the show's called My Comic Shop History. I'd love to know a little bit more about your comic shop history. Before Alternate Realities, were there any other comic shops specifically in the area that you went to?
This was the only one that I can... Oh, you know what? This was my main one. I remember going to Dragon's Den.
The one on Central Avenue?
On occasion on Central Ave. And mainly because of proximity. So I used to live in that... right across from TGI Fridays on Henry Street. So within walking distance of Alternate Realities. And really, I kind of grew up there in a way. It's my hobby.
Alternate, I mean?
At Alternate, Steve, really, he's like a father figure to many of us. But, when you're 15, 16, whatever it was, working part-time at a comic book store, and you kind of had that relationship for many, many years. And I probably saw him more than I saw my father, for example. And don't get me wrong, I'm very grateful for what my father's done, and he's done a lot for us financially. And it's really just, everything is proximity. Like you hang out with people, you get to know them. And so I used to be a lot into non-sports trading cards. So way back when, with the Ultra Pros, the Fleers of the world, or I think I'm getting these mixed up maybe, but those and Image. So I would do sort of the new comics. So the Images and the Valiants of the world, which I guess they still exist. Yes.
Yeah.
It's been a while. But it was just my hobby, and I was very into it at the time. And so, I really got to know Steve also. And so when the time came, when he essentially offered me an ownership role, it was very hard to say no. It was just a matter of making it work, and I was fortunate enough to have the backing of my parents. It did take a bit of convincing, but, I think they saw also that I was treating it as a business, not just some random throwaway money, hobby, or, I shouldn't say it like that. I should just say something that I haven't put too much thought into. So
Right.
I think they saw that. And so, I was able to make it happen.
Yeah, so you were in college at that point when you bought in?
That's a good question.
How
I believe...
How old were you when you started going to the store, just as a customer?
Probably 14, 15,
Okay.
I would say, maybe a little younger. It's very hard to remember.
Yeah.
Steve will know.
No, Steve,
No, he doesn't
No.
know. But it was pretty young, and I was just very into comics at the time. And, this is pre all those movies that we now see today. I remember Marvel on the verge of bankruptcy at some point, and I remember, I don't know, it stuck to me that it was Steve attached bricks onto these prepaid postcards that came into the comic books. So the comic books were like, hey, subscribe, and they gave this little insert that says fill out your name and address. And it was prepaid. And I remember Steve would just sometimes attach a brick to it and put it in the mailbox. And I'm like, why are you doing that? And his whole point was, why are they trying to put me out of business? The comic book store owner, because they want people to go direct. Right?
Subscribe directly from the publisher.
Direct.
Interesting. I never heard that.
I don't know if he actually mailed them out. I think he did, but I don't know if they actually got charged and if it got mailed.
Yeah, the more vengeful, spiteful side of him, I think, has dulled a little bit over the years. But that feels very much, in character. That's the interesting thing with Steve. And I echo everything you said about him being, like a father figure. And I know I catch myself too when I say that sometimes, because it's like, I have a father of my own. But it's like he, very much serves that role, and especially when you're spending, like you were saying, that amount of time, with someone. And the age difference and everything, he really does take on that role, and he did for so many of us. A lot of the people you've heard on the show, have similar types of stories like that, so
yeah, absolutely.
And it's funny too, because now he's in his 60s, but I think about we're talking about these early days of the store. He was in his 30s. Like you and I are in our 30s now. Like it's crazy
Yep.
to think like, we're in that time of our life that he was when he was doing the stuff that we're talking about.
Right. How many Yale graduates do you know that are have stuck with a comic book ownership role versus practicing law?
Yeah.
And so that was always very interesting to me. But you know what? As I really do think it was his passion. It defines who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And as I talk to more people, it's a lot more important to be passionate about what you do versus the money itself. And I'm trying to get people to just really focus on saving and investing so that you can really unlock your freedom, which is basically going after your passion. And some people do it early on, and some people do it later, and some people never get to do it at all. And how sad is it that you may work your whole life just to kind of live and pay your bills, and you never get to really get out there and do what it is that you really want to do.
Right.
But he did it, so I think.
I love how you snuck in a subtle commercial there. So no, let's just say it. So you are a financial advisor now. Can you tell us about your firm, what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I started about 5 years ago, and the name of my company is Pi Capital Management. The easiest way is www.picap.investments. So that's PICAP.investments. I work with all across the spectrum of all people, but I work from anywhere from retirees to, I think my niche is really younger working professionals because I feel like they're underserved. And so I have a $99 plan for individuals that basically is you get me anytime through email, text, and phone. And a lot of people have really found it to be very beneficial because where else can you get that? And it's really about connecting with people and helping them build to their future.
Very cool. There you go. Look, my comic shop history. Come for the comic shops, stay for the financial advising. There you go. So, you start going to alternate realities as a teenager, as a customer first, right? You're into comics, you're into the cards. Mm-hmm. Speaking of your parents and Steve, what did your parents think of Steve? Do you remember any impressions that they had of him?
I don't know if they really had any interaction with him, really.
Oh, okay.
Aside from maybe they knew of him.
Right. I guess you were old enough and you lived close enough that you were just going to the store on your own.
Although I would get picked up from time to time, or actually a lot. Now that I think about it, even though it was maybe a 10-minute walk, it was just kind of ridiculous. But that was me.
And then was there a period of time where you were just an employee at the store before you bought in, or you went from customer to co-owner?
Yeah, I was an employee at some time, so it became sort of a transition from customer to part-timer, as I'm sure most of us become. Were you recruited or did you volunteer your way in? Because those are kind of like the two main ways. I don't remember. But it was definitely something that I wanted to do. But I ended up spending up all my money there anyway. But it was nice to get some things that cost. And it kind of fed my hobby, which was great at the time. And it was just great. And I remember being a manager, quote unquote manager for the first time, and it was, definitely, a learning experience, now that I think about it. I would always be on top of people to be like, oh, why are you taking a break? Like, you should be working like nonstop. And I'm like, that was crazy. Like, why would I, but I didn't know anything back then,
So that's what you would say that as manager at AR? Yeah,
that's what I remember now, that I was maybe a little too harsh, but I don't think I was bad.
Interesting. Who were your subordinates during that time?
Well, I remember Little Drew.
Little Drew, yeah,
was one of them. Mike and Bill,
the Mayo brothers.
Maybe Big Drew at some point, but he was more.
He would go on to become one of the owners.
Yeah, I don't think I was ever really managing him.
Yeah, I guess when I met Drew, I met him as Big Drew because yes, there was this other kid who went to Scarsdale High School, I think, right?
I believe, yeah, Edgemont, yep.
Yeah, and he was little. They obviously both named Drew, so Big Drew, Little Drew. Little Drew faded away, so I don't think anyone's necessarily referred to Cheskin as Big Drew in a long time, but that's how he was known.
That's true. Yeah.
So you're quite the taskmaster then, as manager.
I think I was.
You got to run a tight ship.
Yeah, no, it was a great experience. And, I remember when I was working for Steve doing like putting the backboards into bags, 100 at a time. And for me, it was just like, it's another thing to do. I didn't really think too much about it being a menial task or anything like that. I just wanted to get it done. So I've always been about more organization and just getting stuff done.
Yeah. At that point, what was Steve's time? What was his record on making the bags and boards? Because this became a thing over the years.
Did it?
Oh, yeah.
So I don't think there was a competition at my time, at least.
Okay. Because by my time, he was down to, he could do 100 bags and boards. He could make them up in 5.5 minutes, I want to say. Either 5 or 5.5. But it was very specific. He was very proud of it. I can't say we actually had competitions, but it was just like, that's what he could do.
We should do that.
Yeah. I wasn't far behind. And I feel like if I really pushed, I could have done it. But
Maybe.
yeah, he was, but so that wasn't a thing back then.
No.
See, this is why I'm so glad we're doing this. Cause again, it's like just to get this insight into that era of the store. I mean, all of his Odoisms, like these sayings that he lives by, were these things he was spouting off back then?
I think some of them were. Definitely the flat squirrel. I think I remember that being there for quite some time. I think it was a Mountain Dew. I think that really fed his Odoisms. I remember him having a toothache at some point, and he just kept pushing it. He just literally with his finger in his mouth to make the pain go away.
He was literally pushing the tooth.
Yes, yeah. And it was like, wow. And so, but that was Steve. Like that was like that defines him. That was who he was, and so that's how I know him. And he's got his quirks.
Yeah, you're not kidding. Yeah, the tooth. And I know, I'm trying to think other stuff like that. I mean, of course, one of the Odoisms is, Steve Odo does not get cold. He claimed he absorbed so much heat one summer that it kept him warm all winter. And he even had a specific temperature. I think it was like 23 degrees. At that point, he felt a little chilly. But as long as it was even 1 degree warmer than that, he was fine. Didn't need a jacket.
And it definitely was part of it. I think death is the ultimate release.
Oh,
I don't know
yes.
if that hung around.
Oh, yes, for sure. Again, I think he might have mellowed a little bit on that one these days. I don't know. I mean, he's happily remarried, and all that. So maybe his outlook on that has changed a little bit. Yep. But yeah, death is the ultimate release. Mm-hmm. The tooth thing reminded me of this. I remember there was a very expired bottle of aspirin or Tylenol, something like that. And like very expired. And his solution was just like double the dosage if it's expired. And speaking of Mayo, Bill Mayo, who's a chemist.
Yep.
Like he's literally has a PhD in this. I remember this was probably like over Facebook or something. Bill was like, no, like you can't do that. So yeah, a lot of weird stuff like that.
Yeah.
What about delinquent customers? Because that, of course, when the time came to close the store, that's what he pinned it on that. He was like, people didn't pick up their books. I've had enough. I'm done. Was that an issue in the back in the day?
It was always there. If that were me, I would say, release the book, release what I have at least. Don't hold it indefinitely.
You would, right?
You would think.
That makes sense. See, so like, all right, this is one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about because again, from what I gather from talking to these other guys, you had this business sense even before you went to Stern. And then obviously it was, fine-tuned during your formal education. But, I am curious to get your take on the business side of it. And I mean, do you agree? Like, do you feel like you've always been business-minded even before business school?
I think I've always loved owning a business or building a business and interacting with customers. It's just kind of, I like building things.
Where do you think that comes from?
I don't know. It's inherent, maybe. I think I'm also about personal finance and like always thinking about ways to do things that I think are the best. It's just I'm a numbers guy, and so my dad's a doctor and my oldest brother is a doctor as well. So that kind of went his way. But what I do appreciate with my parents and my middle brother's a developer. He's more into technology and managing projects. But for me, it was something I just came into, and my parents were always very open about what I wanted to learn. They weren't restricting in any way. They didn't want to guide me in one way or another. And so I really appreciate that from them because it allowed me to kind of pursue what I wanted to. So Alternate was definitely a great experience because you deal with all sorts of customers out there. You deal with, I remember one time, I think I switched like our phone carrier because I got a cold call from WorldCom or whoever it was. And Steve's like, what did you do that for? And, I didn't know anything back then about, I was like, oh, I thought it was cheaper, but of course there's probably hidden fees or this or that, or it's a promo period. And he's probably gone through this dozens of times by the time, I started. So just those are real life things that just are there and they happen. But we also kind of came into this whole eBay craze, if you will, when it just started back in the 90s. And this is sort of pre-Amazon and everything else. Amazon just kind of started with books. And so we had to adapt. And I remember our first digital camera was probably a Kodak, and it had like 2 AA batteries, and it could take like 10 pictures with flash because it would just drain the batteries so quickly. And of course you had to hold the camera very still because it was very slow to react. Not like nowadays with your phone and everything else. It's so easy. And so, that's something that Steve, maybe because he's in a different age, didn't really take on to the whole eBay phase, the whole internet phase that started when I was around. And I get it because I'm new to Instagram, and like Instagram's a new, big thing that you need to be on there or you're kind of nobody. And so, but sometimes you need to have that younger blood, or you need to hire people that are born into it, or it comes very naturally to them. And now I'm sure, Steve is very adept at eBay.
I mean, ironically, it's like, now that's
full circle.
His primary means of distribution in terms of divesting himself of all of the remaining AR merchandise.
Yeah, and so it was great. I remember building our, with Metalhead, building the website. And it was awesome to see customers come from across the nation, really. And that was also another challenge, too. How do we fulfill orders? And we'd get some chargebacks where people would charge. I remember going crazy trying to get an order out so that they would get it before a certain time frame. And then they ended up saying, oh, I didn't want this. And so we ended up taking a loss on it. I remember Brandon and Steve would get over, they would come into arguments over sort of some of our eBay posts. Like they would, Brandon was all about getting stuff out. Mm-hmm. So it might be like a lot of 25 comic books, which was basically overstock that we had and we just want to get rid of for like $1 or $2, whatever it may be. And, it really wasn't a very cost effective way to get rid of them. And the crazy thing is, and Steve can probably relate to this, that people would complain even though they're spending $1 or $2, and maybe they got 2 of our lots, and there were some duplicates, and it's like, what do you want for $1 or $2? You're paying pennies for these books, but it was an interesting time for sure.
Yeah, well, I know. Yeah, some people are just never satisfied, but I mean, I'm sure it makes a lot of sense that that tension that you're speaking about between wanting to move product and have that turnover versus hold on to it, hoping that that customer is going to pay the price that, you want for it.
Right. And I remember Brandon being like the idea man. So like he may have had this idea, but I remember like packing up all the boxes and getting them out. I could have, maybe I remember not correctly, but I think that's Brandon in a nutshell.
If you like what you hear, please consider joining the My Comic Shop History Patreon page. I know we're all subscribed to a million different services these days, but your Patreon support helps me cover the costs associated with maintaining the podcast. Plus, you get access to a ton of exclusive bonus content, starting at the $1 level, including the My Comic Shop Book Club, Beyond My Comic Shop, and My Superfan History subseries. If you enjoy the regular episodes, I promise you'll dig the Patreon ones. Thanks to everyone who has already signed up. One of our podcast sponsors is a family of film festivals: the Brightside Tavern Film Festival in Jersey City, the Point Lookout Film Festival on Long Island, and the Hang On to Your Shorts Film Festival in Asbury Park. Find them all on Film Freeway, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for information about dates, tickets, and film submissions. The Brightside Tavern Film Festival takes place the first weekend of August. Also, be sure to visit iTunes or ashareduniverse.com to tune into the official Hang On to Your Shorts podcast. Even before you started working there, I mean, were you curious about the business side of it? Like, did you ask them questions, or did you kind of like observe the workings of the store, kind of thinking about that side of it?
Yeah, I've always questioned about how we make money, how the store makes money, and how things are priced, and what things are returnable and what things aren't. And, these are very basic things that, I know now, but, going into a business, you don't know what that is unless you're in it. And then, I would try different things, and some of them would fail, inevitably, such as, I remember, Steve was very into Star Trek. And I mean, I guess we all were, really. And so he'd play Wrath of Khan, Star Trek 2, all the time. Customers seemed into it as well. And so I'm like, why don't we do like a Star Trek Sunday where we offer 10% off to our customers just because, and we'd have Star Trek playing in the background and whatever. And, it didn't really increase sales at all, but it was just kind of like just a random idea that I had that I thought would bring interest, and clearly didn't work. And then another one was around Christmas time. I think I was open for Christmas for a couple hours at some point. I'm like, what if people need last minute gifts?
Yeah.
And nobody shows up. So, you live and you learn, and that's really what it is. It's about just trying things. And sometimes, if the cost isn't too high, why not try it and then see where it goes? But I remember Steve would always quote Wrath of Khan, and I remember the revenge being a dish best served cold, and that I don't know, I just remember that all the time now. Not because I think that, but when I think of Steve now, I'm like, oh yes, that's Steve.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, just in terms of ideas and sales and things like that. So during my time, we came up with this idea of themed, costume sale, for lack of a better term, where there was like the Christmas version. We called it the white collar sale, where we dressed up in fedoras and shirt and tie and vests. Like, we got all dressed up, and it was the white collar sale. And we did great.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we did really well. And the first year was the best because Steve was away.
Right.
And we did very well.
Okay.
I'm not saying they were related. I'm just saying, the white collar sales went really well. We tried a burn notice sale. If you're a fan of USA television shows, you can see the theme here. So white collar was a show, burn notice was a show. But the burn notice one was a disaster. Like, no one, and we advertised it in the same ways, i.e. printed signs like all around the store. Mm-hmm. And that one went nowhere. But the white collar sales were always effective. But yeah, it's hard to gauge.
It is.
But so what were some of the other things that you implemented? I mean, whether they were successful or not. I mean, I'm curious, like, what your ideas were, especially when you came in as co-owner.
I think it was really about getting to the masses. So I was pushing eBay, I was pushing website, and really trying to drive sales at the time. And this was something that we didn't have technology to do before. And so everything was new. And we started to do a lot more volume, I think, when Brandon and I were running the store together. I think mainly Brandon was picking up inventory and getting better deals, and so buying cases of stuff, and so pushing that, not like forcing it on people, but like, this is what we have and we can offer it at a better price. That's probably one of the first times I negotiated, was like a box of cards. And so that was definitely interesting. Were you there when the arcades were there?
No.
So that was also another, I remember the pinball machine specifically, but
yeah, no, that's before my time.
Pinball machine, X-Men arcade. And when we're talking about business, like, it was, I think his name was Crazy Al, or at least Steve would call him Crazy Al. He owned the machines, and he would just kind of take a cut of whatever we pulled in. And so, but it was a fairly good amount of space that we dedicated for that, for a couple machines.
Was it worth it, you think?
That's the thing. Like, I think that's something where it was sort of, it brought people in sometimes just because it was something to do. But probably for the square footage, probably wasn't the best idea, but it kind of made alternate what it was, it was just a place to hang out. And, we started doing like tournaments and things like that, like Magic tournaments, I remember, and all this other stuff. And that, I think, really helps, when you build in sort of that community aspect to it and get people to come time and time again, not because it's a place to buy your cards or your comics. It's more of, where can I go to engage with people and have fun, right? Who share the same interests that I do.
Right. It's funny with the arcades. So I don't know if you've been to Oh Yeah Comics in Harrison. It's a relatively new store.
I've been there once. Oh, they do have arcades.
They
in
have
the back, right?
Yeah. So that I mean, it's not a full room. It's not completely enclosed, but basically a little side room. And initially, a couple of the owners of the store are comics creators. So originally it was kind of like a drawing area for them. That was that sort of idea. I recorded a few podcasts there, and I thought it made a great little recording studio space. And so I was heartbroken when they decided to fill it with arcade games and pinball machines and things like that. And I don't know, in the times that I've been in there, I don't know. I'm not in there enough to really gauge how effective it is. I don't tend to see a ton of people in there. And more than anything else, it drives me nuts because usually I'm there like if I'm recording or filming something. And if people are playing, then it gets a little difficult. Right. So yeah, I don't know that I'm the biggest fan of that. But, I mean, in hearing you talk about all this stuff, like, I mean, I admire it and I think it makes sense. I mean, looking for ways to grow. Because that wasn't something, like, certainly by the time I came, like, there was some eBay stuff going on. One of the summers that I worked at the store, like, I listed stuff on eBay, but, I think at a certain point, I guess when you weren't there doing it, I mean, I think it kind of faded away.
It was hard to maintain. It's very labor intensive, or it was labor intensive. It's not so much now because we have so many more tools that we do that, eBay developed. But I think the website was probably one of our bigger achievements, but it was hard. It was hard to know what people would want because you can't put everything.
Because so you were selling through
there.
The website.
We were selling through the website as well. eBay was sort of like to get some stuff out, but also to direct people to the website. And that was kind of, I think, Brandon's thought process too behind some of the stuff that we were just liquidating. It wasn't really for the money. It was to get rid of stuff, but also to get people into sort of our ecosystem of our website.
Right. I mean, I asked because I think it's a little bit of a shame because like by the time the website got its final redesign, now I don't think it even exists anymore if you type in alternaterealities.com, but with its final redesign, there was no marketplace aspect. Like it was really just the history of the store, some Odoisms, some photos, contact information.
I think it's also hard to maintain, but also the world has changed a lot, and there's so much more competition out there. So, like, how much are you going to really make by listing your items on a website? It's just a very different environment now.
So when you bought in, obviously Steve was still one of the owners, and you said you're not sure if there were others at the time. It might have just been you and Steve, or you, Steve, and someone else.
It may have been me and Steve at some point alone, and then and then Brandon definitely came in the fold. I think it was 3 of us at some point.
And then Steve
had exited.
And then it was you and Brandon for a period.
Correct.
Yeah. And then what happened at that point? Then,
I believe Steve bought us both out at the same time.
Okay.
But I could be mistaken.
If you don't mind me asking, when you initially bought in, like, what did it cost to buy half or a third of Alternate Realities?
That's a good question. I don't know if I actually know that answer. I'm just going to throw out a number out there that I think is in the ballpark. It was like maybe 30 grand, 20 to 30 grand.
Wow.
Which is, I think, pretty low relative to the business that it's done. But we've had weeks where we were struggling to kind of make it. And so we had our ups and downs, but I think when something happens, like when Pokémon came out and we were one of the first to import the cards into the US or into our store, and people were paying $8, $7, $8, $9 a pack, it was incredible. Like, those were good times for sure in terms of revenue and profit. But on a normal day, during the week, you'd have very slow days. The weekends were always our best. Wednesdays were good. Right. But during the weekdays, it'd be challenging for sure.
Yeah, those Pokemon times. Was there a year where the store did $1 million in sales? Like, was that a thing?
It's definitely possible. I remember. I don't know if this story was shared at all, but when Pokemon was a big thing, I remember we buying something from eBay, or at least we had coordinated to buy like a case of Pokemon cards, which at the time was maybe 5 or 10 grand, or maybe it was 2 cases of cards. And Steve and I literally went down with $10,000 in cash. And we didn't know these people, by the way. We just kind of like, oh, well, they're on eBay and they have the stuff, supposedly. We went at Virginia, I think it was, and met at a mall in the parking lot. And, I really didn't, now that I think about it, that was kind of a little crazy because, like, you're carrying $10,000 in cash and you're meeting 2 or 3 random people in a parking lot to buy something. Could have gone wrong.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it was. Maybe it was Steve, because he was there. Maybe it was just like, it's not a big deal. But yeah, those were probably those days where we were that was probably the onset where we were trying to just get a hold of as much inventory as we could, however we could. And part of that was driving there. Part of it was trying to get stuff from Japan, where we started off that conversation with my mom.
Right, yeah.
And at some point I had family in Thailand. They were bringing in stuff from Thailand, Pokémon stuff like figurines and toys and things like that. And it really was a substantial profit generator, because we would pay a very small amount, and we would be able to charge like a reasonable price here, but they were so cheap coming overseas. Even Chinatown was very cheap relative to kind of what's up here. And so it's, that's sort of arbitrage, in the most basic sense. But, we did take a risk sometimes, and, it wasn't, it was definitely hard work, and, it's hard to quantify that. What is my time worth going to Chinatown and picking up this stuff and then having my mom drive in? We didn't really make those calculations. And so was it really worth it at the end? Probably was, but I didn't really think of it that way. It was more of a passion, more of a hobby, and more of like, this is fun to do versus, oh, I have to do it. But then I did grow out of it. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I did sell, was because it wasn't my thing anymore. And, we were just wrapping up business school, and I wanted to focus more on that side. So nothing against alternate at all. It was just me changing into the person I am today.
With the Pokemon craze, it's amazing. It sounds like you guys were, kind of at the forefront of it. And I'm curious, how did you see it coming? Was it just a matter of like people were starting to ask about it more? Were you tracking it in some other way that you were like, this is going to be the thing?
Yeah, I think it was more based on customers coming in. So we were very keen on what people were asking for. And, when one person asks, it's sort of like, oh, okay. And then you have many, many people asking. And then it was just like, oh, how do we get our hands on it? And Steve, he has family in Japan. That certainly helped from that perspective in terms of getting inventory in. And so it was just a matter of adapting very quickly. And as a small business, you're able to just make that investment. Yes, we had to put 5-10 grand, which at the time was a lot of money for us, for sure, on something that we didn't know necessarily would sell. But after that first, sort of wave went through, then it became easy, because we knew then that it was whatever we got, we could sell. And of course it petered out at some point. I don't think we got caught with a bunch of inventory, but it was, you have to be able to adapt very quickly. This goes in any business, really. It's just a matter of adapting.
Yeah, that bubble's going to burst at some point.
Yeah, you can't like buy something and hope it sells just because you love it, right? It has to be the other way around. And there's probably stories around that, right?
I can't help but laugh.
But yeah, so it was, just being keen on what our customers wanted. And, it was really the kids that were driving the conversation. The parents were just there to pay.
A theme and a question, a debate that I've explored specifically in My Comic Shop Country, the documentary, and it kind of revolves around the Funko Pops, is, this question of, diversifying your product line. And, I know there are a number of shops, they're represented in the movie, who feel very strongly like, no, like at a certain point, if you carry too much of that stuff, you lose your identity as a comic book store. And so you have competing schools of thought on this. And I do understand, both sides of it. And I just wonder, with Pokemon in particular, was there any debate like within the walls of alternate realities of like, no, like this isn't our identity as a comic book store? Or was it really like everyone was on board like, hey, this is the thing, let's make some money?
I don't remember there being any disagreements with Pokemon specifically. I think, Steve was always in good form, and Brandon, about ordering certain comics. So that was our main business, no doubt about that. And so as long as we treated our customers correctly and right, and we kind of held, we serviced them, right? then all this ancillary stuff is okay in my opinion, and I think the other owners would probably agree. Yes, it does kind of change the landscape of the store itself, but what does it matter if we do an extra $5,000 in sales with Pokemon, but we're still doing the same thing as we've always done with our comic book business? Like, it didn't really impact the comic side, in my opinion. It was more of a separate thing that you shouldn't really, restrain.
Right. So it sounds like you guys, were on the same page. I mean, as far as, your other initiatives, I guess specifically eBay and the website, it seems like from what we're talking about, like Steve was on board for this stuff. I mean, like where, if at all, were there the disagreements between you and Steve, or you and Brandon and Steve?
We all got along.
Oh, did you?
That's a tough one. So I think with the website, with technology, eBay website, and all this other stuff, I don't think Steve really wanted to take ownership over it, but he was willing to try it. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know if that was partly because of just a skill set, right? He didn't really, see where it was going. He didn't know how to implement things, but he didn't really restrict it either. So it wasn't really an argument. I think what I remember specifically is between Steve and Brandon, I was sort of in the middle. So this is when we were all owners at some point. Brandon would buy cases and cases of toys, cases of cards and stuff. And, I was maybe being political at the time because I wasn't really opining on what I thought. I was sort of, the more volume, the better, as long as we can sell it, And Steve is more conservative in that respect.
Fair enough. Speaking of Steve and I guess disagreements, I don't know if this ties in or not. You'll tell me. One of the anecdotes that this is either Bill or Metal gave me a heads up about Steve assaulting you in the back room.
What?
Do we no recollection of this?
So who had said that again?
Let's see. That was a Metalhead contribution.
Metalhead, interesting.
So he shared it. So he shared a few things, and I guess this is going back more to the. It's interesting though, because again, I get the sense that all these pranks and it was a little rowdier. But it sounds like you were very diligent, on the business side of it, and again, ran a tight ship with the employees. Can we reconcile those two things? I mean, like as far as the atmosphere, what do you recall it being like at that time?
Yeah, I think, you can have both. I think building relationships and having a good time is part of building camaraderie and having happy employees. It's kind of, I think what made me stay there for a long time was the people. Like, it was just a fun job, not just the customers, but also the employees, Steve and Brennan and everyone else, just good people.
Yeah, that crew, the old guard of alternate realities. So again, Metal, when he finally got specific, he did share a bunch of things. So yeah, Steve assaulting you in the back room. I guess we'll
may have, I don't.
Again, I'm sure assaulting is being used very liberally there. We talked about the Pokemon years, the track team years where you raced Brandon. Do you remember racing Brandon Montclair?
Maybe. If we did, it would have been around the parking lot, I would imagine, like behind the store and in front of the store. I don't remember.
So perhaps races happened.
It may have happened.
This, I feel like you'll probably remember this.
Oh boy.
This probably goes more into like the prank category.
Okay, we can cut out now.
We can if you want. Metal says, when you were originally dating your wife and they did everything possible to make you uncomfortable, including some bathroom decorations.
So I don't remember specifics, but I do remember. Yes, it was definitely because she would come with me on the weekends sometimes to the store to keep me company and stuff like that. And yeah, they're definitely they didn't make it easy for sure. I don't remember what exactly, but it was sort of like random stuff would be on the computer and this was now maybe I do remember that. So stuff would be on the computer like as a screensaver or as like a wallpaper, and I'm sure there was stuff in the bathroom, but it was all in good jest. Like it was all I didn't love it, but it was kind of like that was the environment that I was in. Like it just made the store the store.
And it didn't scare her off, so that's good.
It did not. It did not. And we did get married. I remember, so I mentioned that because Metal, I still am waiting for his wedding gift. I don't think I got anything from him still.
Oh, we're calling out Metalhead. We're calling out Metalhead. Do you remember how he got the name?
I vaguely remember. No, you know what?
No,
I don't remember.
it's all right, because I had him on the show in season 1, and he told the story, and maybe I wasn't just savvy enough yet as host to question him on this, because he was telling the story. I guess there was someone who they called Helmet Head.
There was a Helmet Head who used to ride
and the
a
way
bike.
he told the story, he's like, Metalhead. And at the time, I was just like, oh, okay. And then after, when I was putting the episode together, I'm like, what? That doesn't make any sense. What is that? How is that an explanation?
I'm trying to think. Did he fall off his bike? But he had like a bad accident and remained unfazed. Is that what?
I don't know. All I know is from what he described in the episode, it was Helmet Metal. There you go.
There was definitely a Helmet Head.
Yes. So I don't know. That's about it as far as specifics that they shared. Metal's last comment was that, can we change this podcast into a roast format? How do you think they would roast you if we did that?
That's a good question. Let's bring it on.
He's ready for it.
Next season. Yeah, I don't know. That's I'm sure it would come pretty easily.
And a slightly more serious question. I'm curious, once you actually started business school, your formal education, how, if at all, did it change the way you approached running the store?
That's a good question. It was a little whiles ago, so I'm not sure if I can remember it too accurately. But I think it just opened up sort of, when I was there, it was more about doing and day-to-day stuff. I think the business school really opened up more of the, how do we strategize? How do we get outside of where we are now? How do we expand the business?
I feel like maybe one of the ways our perspectives are a little bit different on alternate realities is that, you were an owner, so you had more of a say and more agency. And if there were things you wanted to do, you had skin in the game, you were actually able to enact it, or at least try to. I think, for people who have listened to these episodes, and especially in the first season, I and other guests on the show, we all express certain frustrations with the way, Steve ran the store, and especially the ways in which that led to him deciding to close the store. So, I think the fact that you were able to actually implement some of these things, because it's as you're talking about, I'm thinking about we always wished he did this or that.
I think also, it's, we set a lot more years on it. So,
Right.
When I was there, add on another 10 plus years, and what's Steve 10 years from now, in terms of running the store. And yes, ownership, I think, changes some things, but it's still challenging, and it's. Do you have specifics as to what?
No.
I'm curious.
Just this general idea, and it's funny too, because whether Steve felt like we were being Monday morning quarterbacks or whatever, maybe he did. I don't know that he always loved some of the feedback that we had about the store. But it's funny because now he's been on this kick. What he wants me to do with the podcast, he wants me to do it in the style of the Graham Norton show, which I don't know if you've seen, this British talk show where it's the host and he has 3 guests on a couch. That's what he wants me to do.
Okay.
And every time I see him, he tells me this. And I'm thinking to myself, I was like, who does this guy think he is telling me how to run my podcast? And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That's what I did with the comic shop. But, we all cared about the store so much. But, to your point about, yes, ownership changes some things. But one thing that I think changed over the years, certainly Steve's outlook. And I think the longer he did it, the more it kind of wore him down, which is to be expected. But there were periods, when I was there working, there's one year in particular where I felt like he was especially galvanized. And, that's when the website got what would be its final redesign, and he ordered the shirts, the alternate reality shirts, so there was still some energy there. But I think in the final years, especially when sort of the last wave of employees kind of moved on, I think that was a shift, because in the final couple years of the store, it was really just Steve, and then Steve Ryan was the primary employee. I don't know if you ever even had the chance to meet him. And, I'm not trying to lay the store's closing at the feet of Steve Ryan. He was a good worker. He was very dependable and responsible, and certainly, if you gave him a task, he would do it. But I feel like my era and certainly the era before, like the Bill Mayo years, I feel like a lot of us, we would take the initiative, even if Steve didn't task us with doing something, to say like, hey, we're going to rearrange this area. We're going to clean up. We're going to get these boxes out of the way. We're going to price this collection and put it out. I feel like there was a little bit more being initiated on the staff side. And I don't think that really happened in those last couple of years. And I think without that forward momentum, I think inertia just really set in. And I don't think the closing is all that surprising. So I think, obviously you had the benefit of being an owner, but I think even just from the staff side, I think that really accounts for a lot.
It's true. And, he also has different priorities, I think, as you kind of get into different phases of your life, what's it worth to own this store and to run the business versus, what he's doing now. And now he's happily married. And so, things change. And one thing that just came to mind that I definitely could not get him to change was the whole automation of inventory. So getting that into a POS system, tried for many, 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 many years. And that's, I'm sure maybe you guys kind of brought that up at some point, but.
And this was so when you were doing this was before Diamond had their point of sale system, right?
Probably.
Because Diamond has their own system now. It's called Comic Suite.
Oh yeah, I don't think
And I don't know if the price point has changed, but at the time when AR was still around, it cost $5,000 to get and implement this system, which, Steve, I guess, didn't feel was a worthwhile investment.
Just like a one-time
Yeah.
fee?
So, but it's the sort of thing where, I guess what we've always tried to stress to him, when the store was there, and even now that it's not, and he has the remaining merchandise that he's selling on eBay, your time is valuable and your time is money. And so, yes, it's $5,000, not a small amount of money, but when you factor in, you're not going to have to do these cycle sheet counts for hours upon hours every week, you can spend that time on something else that might help you grow the business.
Yeah, I don't think it was for lack of not knowing, that his time is valuable. I think he liked to do it, even though he would complain about
that's
it.
Probably true.
And he loved to do it, in the same way. Like he's been doing it for years and years and years. And I remember at some points, going to the UPS, distribution center and picking up the books, picking up the packages, and that's all part of the business, right? And I think he's had his way of doing things, and so some things you can't change. And so that was definitely one of them.
Yeah. Any pet peeves from your time there that you recall? Like, what would drive me nuts? When someone would call and they would insist on talking to SCO. And I'd be like, and I would try, I would try as much as I could, like to just handle it myself. It's like, no, I got to talk to Steve. Okay, we go get Steve. We put him on the phone. And the customer's like, oh, what time do you close? It's like, are you kidding me? So little things like that was probably one of the more mild pet peeves. But anything that really stuck with you?
One thing that Steve did, which he probably still does, is he makes scrap paper. So he'll fold a piece of 8x11 into 4 or whatever, and then basically quarter them. And I don't know why it bothered me, but it was like, why are you doing this? Why are you wasting your time doing this? And also saving boxes and stuff like that. But now I actually appreciate it, and I actually do it myself. Because it is a good size.
I know what you're talking about. So specifically, I mean, he did it with a lot of stuff, but
sure.
The like if you had a package of comic book boards or bags, there would be a slip at the front with the label, with the logo of the company that makes the bags and boards and what size it was and all that. And it's like a glossy paper. And then on the back, though, it was blank. Mm-hmm. So those he would always cut up and he would reuse. I mean, but basically anything. But there would be like behind the register, there'd be like this little...
There's a stack of them.
Little lid or whatever, and they would just all be there.
Yeah, now I have some from like printing out eBay slips. So now I cut some of those in half and I save half of the sheet. And this is all due to Steve, probably.
Yeah.
But one pet peeve is definitely customers that were like coming in around closing time.
Yes.
That inevitably happened. And then you also got the people who came in and didn't buy anything. So we would call them sort of what was this phrase? Like, this isn't a library. Yeah. I'm sure that phrase came up multiple times for some of our customers who weren't really customers. They were just coming to kind of use time,
Right.
because they're waiting for the restaurant next door or whatnot. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I can identify with all of those. I try to, there are instances where, like, if my wife and I are going into a store and it's close to closing, I'm like, no, we can't go. Like, I hate to. I mean, one benefit I think of being in retail, like we talked about at the top, I think it's great because it forces you to have those interactions, and you interact with a wide range of people, like people from all walks of life, different ages, backgrounds. So I think that's helpful in learning to just deal with people generally.
Right.
But it's definitely made me more sensitive. Like if we're in a store and we pick up something and then we're not going to get it, like I'll make sure I put it back in the right spot, like things like that. Because those are all things that kind of drive me nuts.
So you're
as
a good
well.
customer.
Yeah, try to be.
And definitely, yeah, if I was going out around closing, I would definitely make sure I knew what I was going to get. I wasn't going to go there and browse like some people may do. And then you get the knockers too, who it's 20 past when we close, and they would just knock, and Steve loved those people too.
Oh, but of course. As we wind down here, was there anything else that after your time you were like, wow, like I'm glad that the store achieved this or that? Anything in particular that came to mind?
No, I mean, I think this whole documentary thing is really cool to sort of make it sort of everlasting, in a way. And that's really awesome that you're doing this. And I'm very happy to be able to talk about whatever it is that I have, in terms of my experience there. But it was definitely a great place to be. And, it was created by, I think, 3 guys, right, that really loved what they were doing. And it just brings me back to people should follow their passion, whatever it may be. I know it's tough, and it's sometimes it doesn't pay, but you got to make it work, because life is too short to just say, I'm going to take this job and make this amount of money and do this for another 30, 40 years of my life. And so Steve did that, and that's really something that I took away more recently than the past. But sometimes, it's not about when you get there, but if you get there, that's a start.
No, well said. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this. You and I are going to keep chatting for the after show, which will be available exclusively on Patreon. But yeah, thank you so much for doing this, and thank you for your role in the store. For everything that you contributed, and for any of the AR veterans who are listening to this and they're like, oh, why didn't they talk about this? You should have given me more suggestions, man. Seriously, but no. No, we had a lot of great stuff to talk about. And I'm glad that, I was able to pick your brain about that time of the store. It was really cool.
It was a lot of fun, and I'm glad I was invited to be here.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. Thank you to everyone for listening. Be sure to check out the after show on Patreon, and then we will be back with a new episode in 2 weeks. Until then, don't be a flat squirrel.